Welcome back to Good Day Columbia, 7:39. Now this morning, as the investigation into the brutal attack of 16 Afghans goes ongoing anyway, allegedly at the hands of a U.S. soldier, post-traumatic stress disorder known as PTSD is becoming examined to possibly playing a role in the incident. Now check these numbers out. 223.4 million Americans have experienced some sort of traumatic event. It's about 70% of us. 20% or 31.3 million of those incidents turn into and develop PTSD. Staggering numbers. Psychiatrist Gariane Gunter joins us. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
So when you talk about PTSD, of course, the first thing you think of is the military, is, you know, these guys in battle, in combat, and these traumatic incidents. But as Jen and I talked about a few minutes ago, it can happen to civilians. It can be a sexual assault. It can be a traumatic incident at home with your parents, can it not?
Absolutely, and people are fighting their own wars here in the States, and it may not even be something that you would consider traumatic to you. For example, children oftentimes come into circumstances either through abuse or neglect or a witnessed abuse or neglect in their home that can often be a traumatic event for them and can develop into PTSD. And not only do they develop symptoms of PTSD, lots of times they are not recognized as so. Children that develop PTSD don't oftentimes look like our veterans who have symptoms of PTSD.
Sure.
They may become more isolated or irritable or appear anxious or be diagnosed with ADHD because they aren't able to concentrate in school.
Would that be a misdiagnosis then? Is it really a PTSD issue as opposed to an ADHD?
It very well can be. Lots of times the symptoms that are observed in the classroom they're evaluated and the true story is learned, they may have undergone some sort of traumatic event that's truly PTSD and not an ADHD or some other disorder that had been misdiagnosed.
Is there a time frame between that you can check back to the incident and when it manifests actually into, or does that really start, or is it like is it a year, is it 5 years, or is it just one day?
You know, it varies from person to person, but typically you say that you had an event that occurred within 1 month of symptoms starting, but then people can experience these symptoms chronically, you know, throughout their lifetime. So there typically is a clear precipitating event or an ongoing trauma, particularly with children, that can be identified, and then you can kind of backtrack into when these symptoms started and get a clearer picture.
Is there any way you can kind of predetermine, because obviously, you know, 70% of people have a traumatic incident, only 20% develop PTSD. That means the balance, 50%, don't have, they're impervious to it to some extent. Are there any other factors that could lead into whether that kid who was a sexual assault victim, a broken home, whatever it might be, are there any other things that would go into that ingredient that would, you know, become PTSD, or is it just one of those things that if they're in that 20%, then they're in that 20%?
Well, there's some of both, and we are all genetically predisposed to certain illnesses, whether they be medical illness or psychiatric illnesses. So some of us are predisposed not to handle stressors as well, be more prone to depression, anxiety, illnesses. If you already have that genetic predisposition and then you're exposed to some sort of traumatic event, you are more likely to develop symptoms of PTSD. Also, if you have a traumatic event occur and you don't have a strong social support network or people there to support you, or you get help right away and the world continues to crumble around you, then the added stress of not having the support can also lead you down the road of more likely to develop symptoms. So it's kind of a combination of what you're born with and then the world around you during the time of that traumatic event. In particular with children, children that develop a traumatic event, whether or not they develop PTSD or symptoms of anxiety, is strongly related to how their parents handle the situation. If the parents are very stressed and overwhelmed, then typically the children will also become feeling very stressed and overwhelmed. So support, networking, help are very important around the times of traumatic events in children.
We just got time for just one more quick question. Obviously, if it happens to adults at war and children, there really isn't an age, or is there that's a prime, is it like a window that, boy, this is really a crucial time?
No, with some other mental illnesses you have periods of time where they're more likely to manifest. With this, there's not a particular window, it's just the event itself.
Very good. Now you're going to stick around for a little while. In about a half hour we're going to talk about ways to deal with PTSD and different ways you can treat it and hopefully have a positive impact. So Dr. Gariane Gunter, I do appreciate your time this morning.